He gave iPads and cash to all his grandkids, except my son. What he got in return made him. My 8-year-old son stood near the fireplace, his hands shaking just a little as he held a folded note in his jacket pocket. All around him, cousins were screaming with joy, tearing into glossy boxes, holding up brand new iPads, waving crisp $100 bills like it was some kind of game show. My son didn't move. He smiled politely when someone looked his way, but I knew better. I saw the way his shoulders dipped when he realized there was nothing for him on that table. He glanced at me. I nodded. Barely. It was the tiniest signal, but it meant everything. He stepped forward, tugged gently at his grandfather's sleeve, and said, "Grandpa, Mom told me to give this to you. If you forgot me again." You could have heard a pin drop. The football game on the big screen suddenly seemed miles away. My father-in-law, ever the loudest man in any room, froze. He laughed nervously, the kind of laugh that begs the moment to pass. But it didn't. Not this time. He unfolded the paper with a smug grin like it was some silly kid's drawing. Then, his face dropped. No one else knew what was written on that paper yet. But I did. I wrote it. And the moment he read it, the man who'd spent years pretending my son didn't matter, the man who'd thrown cash at every other grandkid like it could buy their loyalty, he suddenly couldn't speak. This is the story of how a little boy's silence spoke louder than all the money in that room, and how a single piece of paper exposed the ugly truth behind every so-called generous act in this family. Let me take you back to how we got here, to the birthday parties my son never got invited to the whispered excuses, to the holidays where he waited for something, anything, from a man who made everyone else feel like royalty. Because this wasn't just about forgotten gifts. It was about being invisible in your own family. And it all began the year we dared to believe we belonged. When I married into the Callahan family, I honestly thought I'd won the in-law lottery. They were loud, funny, and seemed like they pulled their values straight out of a Norman Rockwell painting. Sunday barbecues, Christmas tree farms, 4th of July parades, everything felt like a Hallmark movie. My husband Eric had grown up in a tight-knit small-town family, the kind where Grandpa Bill handed out life advice like candy and everyone called him Pops. At first, Pops made me feel like I belonged. He greeted me with that booming voice and bear hug that could squash bones. He even told me I was the best thing that ever happened to Eric, and for a while I believed he meant it. When our son Mason was born, Pops came to the hospital with balloons and cigars. He held Mason in his arms and said, "There's my newest champ." I still remember crying into Eric's shoulder that night, thinking, maybe this kid is going to grow up surrounded by real love. But things started shifting in tiny, painful ways. The first crack? Christmas, when Mason was 2. Every other grandkid had their name on a stocking, embroidered in red thread, lined up perfectly on the mantel. Mason's stocking was a generic one from a gas station, no name, just Merry Christmas in glitter glue. I laughed it off, told myself it was a mistake. I even offered to buy a matching one for next year. Pops chuckled and said, "Let's see. If he earns his spot first." That one sentence stuck in my chest like a splinter. Then came the birthday parties. Mason never got the big toy sets or the shiny gift cards. One year, he got a box of crayons, used. I remember looking over at his cousin Leo unwrapping a brand new drone, and I swear I saw Mason's little face fall just a bit. He still smiled, said thank you, but it chipped something in him, and in me. I started noticing the way Pops would always forget Mason's name when introducing his grandkids. How he never mentioned him in his proud grandpa stories. At first, I wondered if I was imagining it, if I was just too sensitive. Eric said his dad was old-fashioned, that maybe he didn't know how to connect with every kid the same way. But it wasn't about connection, it was about choice. And Pops was choosing to leave Mason out. The biggest red flag? That Thanksgiving dinner. Every grandkid got a seat at the kids' table with their own engraved plate, their favorite foods, labeled with their names. Mason's plate? A leftover from the cupboard? No name, no label. Just placed quietly at the end, like an afterthought. I sat there watching my son pick at his food, pretending not to care. But I saw the way he stared at the others, how he counted their plates, looked at the names. He knew. He felt it. And right then, I knew this wasn't accidental. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was something worse. Mason was only 5 the first time he asked me a question I wasn't ready for. We were driving home from Grandpa Bill's birthday party, the one where every grandkid got an iPad with their names engraved on the back, except Mason. He'd received a book, a used one. The kind with torn pages and someone else's name written on the inside cover. He didn't cry. He didn't complain. He just held it on his lap the whole ride. Quiet. Too quiet. Then he said, "Mom, is Grandpa mad at me?" I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. "No, honey," I replied, my voice catching. "Why would you think that?" "Because he always gives the big presents to the others, and he never hugs me. And today, he didn't even look at me when I said, 'Happy birthday.'" I swallowed hard, reached over to brush his hair back. Maybe he just had a lot on his mind. Mason didn't say anything back. He just looked out the window, his little fingers tracing invisible patterns on the glass. That's when I realized something had shifted. Children are born with wide eyes and open hearts. They don't come into this world knowing how to measure their worth against others. That's something we teach them, slowly, painfully, in ways we never intend. Mason had been watching, learning, taking note of the small things that grown-ups hope go unnoticed. Every forgotten invitation, every dismissive shrug, every second-tier gift. He was tallying it all, quietly, in the back of his mind. At school, he started pulling away from the other kids. His teacher told me he'd become too quiet. Said he sat alone at recess even when the others asked him to play. He started drawing a lot. Pictures of rockets, castles, animals, but never people. Never family. At night, he asked questions that broke my heart into pieces. Am I part of the family? Do I have to be gooder to get a real present? Maybe Grandpa just doesn't know I'm his grandkid. Every time I tried to answer with hope, with love. But the truth was, no child should ever have to ask if they're enough. And no grown man should ever make a child feel like they're invisible. I'd spent years making excuses, trying to keep the peace, smiling through holidays where Mason was overlooked, outshined, or outright ignored. But my son was starting to believe the lie that he mattered less, that he wasn't worthy. That's when I knew. We couldn't wait for Grandpa Bill to change. We had to show him what real value looked like. It happened on a Sunday afternoon in, late November. The family was gathering at Grandpa Bill's house for the annual Thankful Brunch, an event he started years ago as a tradition before Thanksgiving. It was always the same. Long tables covered in flannel runners, pies stacked like trophies, and gifts lined up by the fireplace for his special little people. Mason was dressed in a soft blue sweater he picked out himself. He'd brushed his hair back twice before we left and asked if he should write a card for Grandpa this year. A real one, with words I make up myself, he'd said, eyes shining with the purest kind of hope. We walked in, and the room was full of laughter. Hugs, squeals from the other kids who had already opened shiny new packages. Nintendo Switches, cash-stuffed envelopes, designer sneakers, the works. It was like watching a TV commercial come to life. For everyone but Mason. He stood by my side, eyes scanning the pile near the fireplace. His name wasn't on anything. Not a box, not a bag, not a single card. But that wasn't the worst part. What broke me was when Mason quietly pulled out the card he made, folded it in half, and slipped it back into his jacket pocket like it had never existed. He didn't say a word. Didn't cry, didn't even look surprised. Just turned and walked toward the backyard alone. And I stood there frozen. All the times I told myself it wasn't that bad, that Mason didn't notice, that maybe it would get better, all of it crumbled because it was bad. And he did notice. And it wasn't getting better. I followed him outside a few minutes later and found him sitting by the fence, legs crossed, staring at the gravel. He didn't look up when I sat next to him. He just said, "Maybe next year I'll be one of the real grandkids." That sentence. That single, heartbreaking sentence lit a fire in me I didn't even know I had. I kissed his head and held him close. I didn't have the words right then, but in my heart something had shifted. No more silence, no more pretending. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was emotional cruelty. And it had gone on too long. That was the moment I knew we had to do something. Something that didn't involve begging for Grandpa Bill's approval. Something that would show Mason, once and for all, how worthy he was. Not just in my eyes, but in the eyes of everyone who'd ever dared to overlook him. I didn't know exactly what that would be yet. The idea came days later, while folding Mason's laundry. I found that handmade card again, the one he meant to give Grandpa Bill. It had slipped out of his pocket and into the laundry basket. The ink had bled a little, but his words were still legible, crooked letters and all. "To Grandpa, I love you even when you forget me. From Mason." I sat on the floor and stared at it for 10 whole minutes. Then I got up and called Drew. Drew is my brother, graphic designer, quiet genius. Mason loves him like crazy. I told him what had happened at brunch, word for word. He didn't say much, just asked for a scan of the card and told me to trust him. A week later, I got a package. Inside was a hardcover children's book. The title read, "The Boy Who Waited by the Fire." The main character had Mason's eyes. The story? A perfect poetic retelling of that Sunday. Every hurt, every ignored moment, every time Mason asked, "Why not me?" But it didn't end. In sorrow. It ended with a boy discovering he didn't need anyone's permission to feel worthy. Mason loved it instantly. He read it 3 times in one night and slept with it under his pillow. When I told him we could make more and send them to kids who felt the same way he did, his eyes lit up like a sunrise. So we did. We launched a little site, Fireplace Stories. Told Mason's tale with his permission. Posted the book. Added a donation button that said, "Help us print one for another forgotten kid." Within a week, the book went viral. Teachers ordered sets for classrooms. Pediatric therapists asked for bulk discounts. Parents emailed to say, "My son is Mason, thank you." Local news picked it up, then national morning shows. We had to buy 3 new printers. Grandpa. Bill, he didn't notice at first. He doesn't really do the internet, but at the next family gathering, someone brought up the book. Said their kid's school read it in class. Showed him the website. His smile faltered. He asked who made it. Mason stood there, calm and proud, and said, "It's about me." You could have heard a pin drop. Grandpa Bill's face turned pale as he stared at the cover. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the book and flipped through the pages, stopping when he saw the illustration of a boy in a striped hoodie, Mason's favorite one, sitting alone by a fireplace while other kids unwrapped shining gifts behind him. His jaw tightened. His voice dropped to a mutter. "Is this supposed to be me?" Mason didn't flinch. He just nodded and said, "You gave them iPads and cash. You gave me socks. I waited by the fire because that's the only place left for me to sit." Everyone froze. No one was laughing anymore. Even cousins who'd been texting under the table had put their phones down. You could feel the discomfort vibrating through the air, like someone had pulled the floor out from under us all. The wine glasses stayed full. The turkey grew cold. Grandpa Bill cleared his throat, but no words came out. He looked to his daughter, my sister-in-law, like she'd bail him out, but she didn't, because she was crying. Not big dramatic sobs. Just quiet, shoulder-shaking grief that came from recognizing the pain she'd ignored. "Dad," she said softly, "I think you owe Mason an apology." Bill looked from her to me to Mason, then back at the book. He dropped it on the table like it burned him. "You all made me into a villain," he spat. "For what? Some little story?" I stepped forward. "No," I said calmly. "You made yourself into this. We just stopped hiding it." Mason didn't need revenge. He needed to be seen. Grandpa Bill shook his head and stormed out of the room, but no one followed. And that was the moment the family finally chose Mason. They surrounded him. One cousin offered his unopened VR headset, placing it gently in Mason's lap without saying a word. Another, who'd been closest to Bill, whispered, "I never realized he was like that to you." Even Grandma Elaine, usually Bill's shadow, took Mason's hand and kissed his knuckles like she was afraid he might vanish. I looked down and saw that Mason was crying, but not because he was sad. He looked lighter, unburdened, like something he'd been carrying alone had finally been passed to the people who should have helped him carry it all along. He looked up at me, eyes wet, and whispered, "I think they see me now." After the dinner ended, the house was quieter than it had ever been. No holiday music, no loud banter from the uncles, just the soft clinking of dishes being cleared by hands that moved slower now, more thoughtful. I helped Mason take off his sweater, brushing crumbs from the collar while he stared at the now empty seat where Grandpa Bill had sat. He didn't say anything, but I knew what he was thinking. I was thinking it too. A door had closed, but maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. The next morning there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not angry, just 3 calm knocks. When I opened it, Grandpa Bill was standing there, holding the book. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired from age, but from carrying something heavy for too long. He handed the book to Mason and said, "Would you sign it for me?" Mason's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked up at me. I nodded. With careful, shaky letters, Mason signed his name on the inside cover. "To Grandpa Bill, so you won't forget me again." Bill's eyes glassed over, and I watched as he pulled Mason into a hug, not the kind he gave the other grandkids with a quick pat and a forced smile. This one lingered. This one trembled. "I didn't know how badly I messed up," he whispered. "But I want to learn." It didn't fix everything overnight. There were still wounds, still stories that couldn't be undone. But for the first time, Mason saw that adults could change. That silence didn't have to last forever. That sometimes the quietest child in the room holds the loudest truth. And when he saw that, something opened in him. Something strong. He started drawing again, laughing louder, sitting in the middle of the group instead of on the edges. As for the rest of the family, they followed Mason's lead. Cousins invited him to their game nights. Aunts checked in on his drawings. His teacher called us to say he'd volunteered to read aloud for the first time. "He said he's not invisible anymore," she told me, confused but happy. And in that moment, I realized my son didn't just heal. He taught the people who hurt him how to be better. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with quiet strength and unshakable truth. He gave his pain a name, and made sure no one ever forgot it. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to smash that thumbs up and hit subscribe for more unforgettable, emotional, and viral true stories. We want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell us, where in the world are you watching from?